Welcome to a very special edition of Fans Fight Back on the PitchBoxing app. Myself, Martin Theobald, loving the t-shirt. Gabe Montoya, how are you, Gabriel?
I'm doing well, man. This is done by Amanda Kelly. If you ever see her on, yeah, I had to buy it. I mean, she did a full, Hagler painting, but I had to have the shirt. So, and yeah, I like the double bald guy thing that I've got going.
It looks like a reflection.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, Amanda Kelly's artwork is phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I bought my brother the Roberto Duran one because he's a big Duran guy. And yeah, man.
Excellent. Gabe, we've got you on because of your expertise, opinions, views on PEDs and one case in particular, which has hit the headlines once again, Conor Benn. Your views in the States, you're based in LA. Let's see how they compare with what's kind of come out over here in the UK. How's it been covered? How's your, what's been the view over in America of Conor Benn? And I'm going to use my words carefully because I'm not going to use the words cleared. Conor Benn being allowed to resume his career under the WBC auspices, not necessarily under many others.
Yeah, I mean, there's 4 sanctioning bodies. So yeah, 1 out of 4 ain't bad, right?
1 out of 4, but you haven't got a license anywhere in the world, as I say this, to go and fight.
Well, to me, I'll get into the coverage probably as I go, but I thought Dan Raphael did a great piece. He pointed out that a few journalists pointed this out that it seemed like the WBC was zeroing in on the first positive that was under the clean boxing program. There was 2. The second one happened while Eubank and Ben were doing testing together. And so we didn't really find out about that first one until way later. And it sounded like the commission had it and they didn't really know what to do with it. And that's kind of the problem of having VADA be the tester. Or I should flip that. That's the problem with the commission's not accepting that VADA is a legitimate testing agency and actually giving teeth to their rulings, because VADA doesn't adjudicate anything. They catch people pretty consistently and for a variety of drugs, and then the WBC undermines them, or commissions undermine them, or they don't, depending on where we are. Because in America, they've got like 50 different commissions, and there's also the Native American communities that put on fights. So it's about, I don't know what, when I emailed everybody to ask about their drug testing, it was like 76 emails that you can send out to find out, and that's different jurisdictions that have different rules. But what Dan pointed out, which I thought was great, was he talked about strict liability, and that principle within the clean sport movement from the World Anti-Doping Agency on down is that the athlete's responsible for what goes in their body. And so there's going to be a penalty for this happening, unless you can really prove, that it was contamination and this, or whatever. But in Ben's case, and I did an interview with Danny Flexen for Seconds Out, and he pointed this out, that only up until 3 weeks ago, the whole story from Ben's camp was that it was VADA's faults, and there was some sort of testing issue, or there was contamination. But these things were kind of thrown out as Eddie Hearn went on his charm offensive in the media, doing different interviews and kind of wiping his hands of the thing, but then kind of throwing doubt on everything but the guy that tested positive. And so where we get through this, I'm just kind of wrapping all this together, is when I saw it, what I thought was, 1, disgust, but 2 was that the WBC has basically just said, they're signaling, okay, if you don't go to the, get your license in the UK, find a place where you can get a license. And who with going to, Dubai, going to Saudi, or wherever, going to Arizona in Chavez Jr.'s case when he tested positive and they went venue shopping.
To fight.
Yeah, WBC basically said, go venue shopping and we got you. By the way, I'm going to go give this fake belt to Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. Just a whole weekend of just showing how the WBC is all about the money. So, what Dan pointed out, though, with the strict liability, getting back to that, is in the clean boxing program, it doesn't exist. That rule, which WADA uses, USADA uses, VADA uses when you're doing their testing, doesn't exist in the clean boxing program. So guys could come up with an excuse, and the WBC's left this loophole. And that's a new one on me. Why have a drug testing program if you're not going to hold people responsible at the most basic level of, like, this got in your body, you have stanozolol in your body, or whatever it is. In this case, it's clomiphene twice over a kind of a long period of time. If you think about clearance. Yeah, I'm just kind of disgusted by it. And I'm also just kind of curious. It seemed like, I think that the Guardian, and there was a few others, I think the Times,
Matt Lawton in the Times. Yeah,
referred to Conor Benn as having been cleared. And that's not what happened here, because, again, it was like only in the last 3 weeks did he come up with the egg excuse. And we don't really know all the science on that. I mean, I saw on WADA's website 3 years ago now, in March, they said, hey, this might be a problem, and people have alerted us to it about clomiphene in eggs. We're going to undertake a study, but I haven't been able to. Where's the study? Where's the science? So yeah, I've kind of left more questions than answers. Although and one confirmation that boxing is as dirty as it's ever been, and there, the problem isn't just the drug cheats who usually bear the brunt of everything. Everybody wants their names ruined and wants them punished. Nobody ever holds the administrators to account. Wherever this guy fights next, if he doesn't get some sort of ban, people need to put pressure on whoever's going to give him that license. But also, Eddie Hearn needs to be called out. These cloying, long interviews where Eddie flirts with his interviewer are just maddening to watch. While he kind of lays out and attacks people, and there's no pushback. There's a reason why Eddie will sit down with you for that long, is because you're not pushing back. So yeah, I think it was the one bit of coverage I saw that I liked. There was an interview with Maurizio Suleiman of the WBC. I think it was Boxing Social, and they asked him, well, how many eggs is a boxer now allowed to eat? What's the maximum? And Maurizio Suleiman's response was, a boxer needs to be, careful for, what they put in their body, but apparently they don't need to be responsible for it.
Don't have to be that careful.
So yeah, I don't know. That's a lot of thoughts, but it's kind of where I'm at with it. I just kind of disgusted. I'm in my 13th year of kind of knowing about PEDs and caring about them in the sport. I started my first article in 2010 about it. That's all around when Floyd was asking Manny Pacquiao to do drug testing, and yesterday I just was like, why do I care about this?
It gets to the point, doesn't it, where you think, if they don't care, then why should we as fans have any interest? And I've long stood by the argument, you should just have two different sports. Just have one where it's open door policy, take whatever you want, and the other one, strictly clean. But if you ever get found dirty in the strictly clean one, you're booted out of all of it. You're never allowed to box in any of them. At least if you sign up for the dirty one, you know what you're in for at that point, and no one can sit and do interviews after someone's hurt in the ring and start crying on camera because they've all signed up for it. Whereas what really, really guiles me is that you've got people that will go on camera straight after there's a tragedy in the ring, who will also go on camera right now and defend somebody who I think we can all accept has maybe done something that they shouldn't have done. I'm not naming names, and that could be anyone I'm talking about for legal purposes. I think,
but I mean,
that really gets to me. That I think how somebody has failed 2 drugs tests, and you've gone out to bat for them to try and say that everything is absolutely fine. You can't take that stance for me and also be horrified when things go wrong in the sport.
Absolutely right. And at the end of my interview with Danny Flexen, I called out Lou DiBella, and I mentioned him again on a show I was on last night, and like a panel that I was on, because it is frustrating having dealt with Lou. I know Lou. We've communicated since I've stopped, being a beat writer. So I don't, and I've tried to contact him. And at this point, I'm like, Lou's very online. He's very vocal on social media, interacts with people, does a lot of interviews, when asked, and particularly with the interviewer that I was with. But he's promoting that Jean Pascal fight. And I saw the reason that he, was doing the fight was like, look, Greg Leone, who represents Pascal, is an old friend of mine. And he wanted to back him in the fight, needed the help, I guess, and financially. And so Lou is backing it. But Lou has also been a proponent of better drug testing in the sport. We've talked at length about, guys he thinks are dirty, or I think, and then to turn around and ignore the fact that Jean Pascal tested positive twice for EPO, didn't do what Canelo did and like do a hair follicle tests, or enter into a 365 program to like show like there's no long-term use. There doesn't seem to be any sort of retribution here, any sort of problem other than lost time, which is everything to a boxer. He was already older. That's probably why he was doing EPO. But to me, it's like those guys are Lou doing that. It hurts the sport as much as anything. It's been 10 years. 2010 was when Floyd threw it out. So we're like at 13 years. It was like spring when him and Shane Mosley announced their fight. I think it was like March, and they would fight in May. But somebody called Floyd a visionary for that. Well, visionary would have finished out the thing. Like, he's doing an exhibition this weekend. I wonder if there's drug testing for it. Probably not. Why isn't Gervonta Davis why wasn't he handed the anti-doping torch, and he's the next guy pushing USADA testing and VADA testing and being vocal about it, not like quiet about it the way the PBC is, hoping nobody knows if there's drug testing, just in case somebody tests positive and they can just do whatever they're going to do. To me, even Bob Arum, I'll never forget his face after Manny Pacquiao got knocked out against Juan Manuel Marquez, and he's looking at Manny. And then after that, they started doing more drug testing and becoming more amenable to it. And I was at, I think it was the press conference for Bradley Provodnikov, and Bob walked over and was like, we're going to do testing. I'm like, for this fight, for all of them, and I was like, all right, but where is that testing now? It's not very consistent. It's kind of been left up to the fighters. That's what the V in VADA stands for, is voluntary. And that's, okay, you got kind of a volunteer clean army, but they're only doing it for their fights. So are they doing it like Lance Armstrong, where they're kind of doing whatever over here, and then, okay, I know when I'm going to get tested, and then doing their thing? There's like a skeleton that's there, and nobody's, putting flesh on it, and animating it fully. And it's very frustrating to see, but it's also very pointed that the system is adjusted to having drug testing in the mix. And I think people have gotten smart about when they're implementing it, rather than actually having it. And to your point about we should have a drug league and a regular league, I just call that professional sports, because or it's like the Olympics, because the TE ratio test, we're all 1-to-1 on testosterone to epitestosterone, but in the Olympics you can have 4-to-1. What does that say? In Nevada, where Floyd always fought, it's 6-to-1. So, and that was, it used to be that WADA started with a 6-to-1, and then they realized everybody was just going up to the line and not going over it. So after like 10 years, they dropped it to 4-to-1, but New York and Nevada still have 6-to-1. And there's a reason for that. So, it is legalized doping, but to your point also, like when you do catch somebody, you don't let them go.
And I think that's the thing, is that what you were saying there about, Bob Arum going back in time and saying, we're going to implement testing, There's a piece by Eddie Hearn, I think it was 2019, after a Katie Taylor fight, saying that he wanted VADA for all fights for Katie Taylor in the future, because he didn't want to run the risk of anyone on drugs ruining her legacy and ruining her cash-making ability in the future. So he was very strict about, he wanted that kind of testing. Why? Because if somebody gets caught under it, you're going to do everything, as long as it's on your, the balance is in your favor financially and in terms of your stable of fighters and future earnings. You're going to do everything you can to get out of those failed tests. So why I struggle to even comprehend why promoters give us a shtick about, you know, VADA is the gold standard, da 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 da. When Jarrell Miller popped for everything under the sun, he was chucked under the bus. I mean, it'd be a significantly sized bus, but he was chucked under it immediately. Like, there was no wait and see the B test. There was no wait and see what his legal team come up with. There was none of that. It was very much like, he's dirty, get him out of the sport, never work with him again.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
inconsistencies are horrendous. Horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in the NBA, the refs, you know, the stars always get the calls, you know, and that's just kind of in all sports. Jarrell Miller was not in a position to do that. John Pascal, you know, is at least a hometown draw and it's got a, you know, a name, and you can market around him. You're right, and there's just so many inconsistencies. It's as Ludabella astutely said, that boxing is not a sport; it's a series of individual business transactions. And that's all it is, and nothing really, you know, sometimes things build towards each other, but you know, most of the time it doesn't. And I think in some ways it's run by dinosaur thinking, you know. It's kind of get rich quick, and nobody really builds anything for the future. I think the PBC thought they were going to do that for a while. Maybe they still do, and that's why, you know, like, to me, the having a drug testing agency legitimized the UFC in some sense, and bringing in the people that they did to have, you know, as their anti-doping czar, and just having, you know, USADA as their you know, stamp of approval. We all have our opinions in boxing about USADA, but and you know, opinion was you know, the reputations are earned, but you know, for them, and then soon after they, you know, they sold for like you know, a few billion or whatever. I think there was maybe thinking around that in 2010 when Floyd did this, and then the PBC was born, and they were like, we're doing Olympic style testing, and they even, you could track them, you know, on USADA's website for a while, all the fighters that were doing the testing. They were doing it in the fights, not outside of competition. But I think that idea is like long gone. I don't even think that program exists anymore in professional boxing. But VADA is still there, and I think what it would take, you know, stuff like this just shows like the whole tattered nature, you know, the tattered structure that holds boxing up. Because they need a fighters union, they need pensions. Ronda Rousey, I think, is just introducing a bill here in California that's trying to get pensions for the MMA fighters or address that issue. There's nothing like that. We stopped at the All E Act, and that was a long time ago, and everyone knows it doesn't really have teeth. So I don't know, maybe we need to revisit the All E Act and implement some sort of anti-doping structure. But all in all, like the kind of gold rush mentality in boxing, where you're just kind of getting rich now, not building for the future. I don't think any of these guys saw the streaming wars coming, and then they just got in, let me get my own stream, rather than thinking, how do we build this into a league so that we get fights on time? Like, Andy Ruiz is leaving the PBC. Think of all the fights that could have happened for him there that didn't, because we're not a league and it's not structured in this way that fights just kind of have to naturally happen. Like, if this one doesn't, then it kicks off this matchup. And, you know, and if we were a bigger business, then we could really address this and have a drug testing program, and it will have its own problems. But the way we are now, I think we're just going to keep limping along like this, case by case.
And going back to the point you made earlier about the coverage of Conor Benn and the WBC, and the fact that it has been reported by numerous people in the UK that he's been cleared by the WBC, is like madness. Because the likes of Matt Lawton at the Times, he's a very good reporter, Matt Lawton. I'm not having a crack at him. And actually, his coverage in things like athletics of anti-doping is very strong. But he's missed the point by a country mile in this. Saying that he's now cleared completely overlooks the fact that there's an outstanding UKAD case, completely overlooks the fact that the British Boxing Board of Control still want to have that conversation with him, completely overlooks the fact the WBC haven't actually cleared him as such, more said that we couldn't come to a conclusive set of evidence that says that he was cheating. More very much that, yeah, we'll take the answer about these eggs. I did see a piece with ID Boxing with Mauricio Suleiman where they were asking him about the eggs. And yeah, he just flagrantly got himself out of the question, like badly as well. Wasn't even well prepared. For all the stick that Hearn may get, at least he's always on message with what he comes across with in interviews. Suleiman was like he hadn't anticipated somebody was going to ask him this question. It was bonkers.
He's been very much a politician. It was ID Boxing. That's the interview I was thinking of, and I'm glad somebody asked him the question. That's the job, is to get it in there and have a follow up. And what Eddie does is he takes over the interview. He doesn't let you ask questions. He just starts talking and he asks you questions. So that takes up the space of the question you were going to ask. And he's very manipulative. He's a much more charming Richard Schaefer.
He'll answer the question that he wants to answer, not the question that you give him.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, in my view, there are some very simple questions that could be given to Conor, to Eddie, to whoever, which, in my mind, I would say, given that it's reported, I think, that they said it will be 35 eggs per week that he's been eating. I don't know if you saw this. There was an article with GQ magazine that Conor did, October 2022, just prior to the tests happening, where he talked about his lifestyle, broke down his lifestyle about his life at home, his training, his diet, the number of calories he intakes per day. All the way through, he eats stir-fried vegetable stir-fries, broccoli stems, sometimes an omelette. That was his words, like verbatim as well. I'm not making this up. Sometimes an omelette. And he also mentioned egg fried rice. Now, 35 eggs per week is, what's that? 8 per day, right?
That's a lot of eggs, but
how big's your sometimes an omelette that you're getting that kind of intake? Now, somebody asked that.
Like, well, I make omelets and for my wife and I, and I'm like 4 eggs for 2 people. It seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, sometimes, literally verbatim, sometimes an omelette. So where have the rest of the eggs come from? This was in October. The second failed test happened in October. So that dietary element, and there's also a YouTube video knocking about where it talks about him at home and it shows his life in the kitchen, and he goes through and so in depth that he talks about how he makes a low-fat cheesecake using low-fat yogurt, digestive biscuits, He breaks down his diet to that amount. Not one mention of eggs throughout the entire piece. Not a single one. So where does that fit into his diet that he's been discussing so openly?
Well, that's the thing. If he were provided receipts for this amount of eggs that was bought, well, also, isn't clomiphene not allowed in the UK to be put in?
That's the other point. That's the other question I'd love to see somebody ask. So you have the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, who work in the UK. They set the food standards of which farmers have to adhere to be allowed to farm. Clomiphene is banned from feeding into chickens. So that makes a second question. Like, A, provide the receipts. B, where are the import receipts? Because you have to have been getting these from overseas. If not, you need to be going back to that farm and taking legal action against that farm, because you're buying those eggs that you're eating 8 of per day in very good faith that they don't contain clomiphene, because that wouldn't meet the DEFRA standard. So either you need to go back, sue the living daylights out of that farm because they're not adhering to what you would believe as a clean athlete they should be doing, or you provide the import receipts for an awful lot of eggs. Like,
and how do we know? I mean, it's the training camp. Like, I don't know if he did an isolated camp or what, but it's like, how do we know?
The Isle of Wight, I believe, which is a small kind of island off of England.
So, I mean, how do we know other people in the camp weren't eating the eggs? You know what I mean? Like, if you're buying them, like, you're feeding a group of people, but you're eating all of them. Does it say it on the receipt? These are only for Conor. It just doesn't. That's why, like I pose it's Occam's razor. It's like, what makes more sense? That this drug that is known for being, used for cycling off of a drug cycle or a PED cycle of some kind was used and he got caught twice, with it, or he got a bunch of imported eggs that had too much clomiphene in them, and he ate them all himself at such a clip, like Kulan Luke, that he came up positive twice and didn't figure it out after the first one. Didn't even try. Didn't figure it out until 3 weeks ago, when he was blaming everybody else until all of a sudden it was this.
And also, to go back to your earlier point, that WADA piece, I think it's actually dated 2018. That WADA research paper into the link between clomiphene and eggs, because I had a look at it the other day myself on their website. Now there is no report on the back of it. There's just a page on their website that says,
right, it's are poultry and eggs a source of minute amounts of clomiphene in doping control samples. It says publication date 11 March 20.
Okay.
The download option, but it said the year it was accepted was 2019.
Yeah. Okay. So it took me the best part of 35 seconds to find that on Google, probably less. If I were a nutritionist for a professional athlete, now I would want to be very aware of the potential links between those things. And I would think as a nutritionist for a professional athlete, they would be aware of such risks. Also, of lifestyle. Like, is it healthy to be eating 35 eggs in a week? I mean, there are other sources of protein that might, solve your need better than that.
I just, nutritionist is a word that's thrown around a lot in boxing. And I just think that, boxing is so full of quackery and strange science and I want to know who that person is. That's the other thing is, when are you going to release the reports to, qualified reporters? You don't have to put it just online for anybody. I'd love to read it. When are you going to release your results and the documents surrounding the 2 adverse findings? I don't know has anybody released that? Because I'd love to see all of it, not just the adverse finding, but like, what were your, readings? What was, your different levels while you were cycling off of this, using clomiphene? I think that's going to tell us a lot. And why haven't you released it? Like, like one of the last stories I did was Kung Lee and his HGH positive, according to the UFC. And I was able to get in touch with him within like days of all this going down. It was like his last fight. UFC's like, oh, he tested positive for HGH. People had this photo of him working out, looking super jacked, and we're like, oh, of course. He sends me all his paperwork, him and his manager, lawyer, I forget who it was, and it showed that he'd never been tested for HGH. That they'd looked at his levels, and the UFC was kind of like, its own shop at that point, and it was an overseas fight, and they did their own testing, quote unquote, but they didn't do, and the HGH testing at that point, people weren't quite sure, there's still kind of like the efficacy of I think there's 2 different tests, but he'd never been tested. But an innocent guy hands over his documents really fast to a reporter, doesn't mince words and go, look, like, I'm innocent. What we've gotten from Conor Benn is a 270-page report that doesn't go to the guys that give him a license. It goes to one of the 4 sanctioning bodies who happens to have an anti-doping program you got caught in. And hey, man, will you guys rank me? And there's no, I don't want to accuse anybody of a briefcase of money, but like, how did this go down?
Yeah.
What are and why only them, and why no accountability to everybody else? Those are, I want answers.
And there's still the question mark. To me, if you go way back a few months now, he was working with Dr. Uz, whose specialism is testosterone replacement therapy. Like, that seems to have gone completely under the radar at this point. But another point you made earlier was about the almost twofold reasoning behind it. The first being they tried to blame contamination, and the WBC make reference to that within their statement, don't they? Which is, you tried to say there was a contamination issue. However, they might as well have written, our scientists said, do one, mate, because you can't bring into question the sanctity, the cleanliness, and everything that goes with those testing environments. Because if you do, if you start trying to question that, then you're saying the whole system is flawed from point dot, because you're saying that those testing environments aren't fit for purpose. Because I'm saying mine happened to be, out of the thousands and thousands that go through it, mine was the one that happened to be contaminated.
Right.
When
Brandon Rio tried the same excuse with VADA when he tested for DMAA. I think that was the drug. It was like a stimulant after the Pacquiao fight, and that went nowhere. I don't even think it went this far with it. But yeah, I mean that's also it's blaming the institution for contamination. Is as old a thing as "I never knowingly ingested" is a phrase. You know what I mean? It's just they got a lawyer and they're going different avenues.
It's insulting to the laboratories that do these things. They don't just test for VADA; they test for hundreds of bodies around the world. Like, these aren't. It's not just one little environment, one little laboratory that's just doing a couple of tests per year. There are thousands going through these things. Of which,
they handle the Olympics at this level. They handle the professional league sports. So I mean, it's the likelihood that it would happen is it just isn't going to happen.
But it almost feels then like, if you're going to use that as your reasoning and your rationale behind why there's a failure, is you shouldn't get a second hit at it. You shouldn't get like, oh right, okay, well that didn't work. How about eggs?
Right. That's a great point. Yeah. Well, I guess we found this on the internet. Does this work? Yeah. I actually didn't see it the first time around, right around the time we were talking about it. I was over in Europe, so I wasn't surfing the way I am here. But like, I ran into it here the other day, that WADA report. So I wonder, how long did it take him to get to that? And or how long did it take to, how many eggs does it take to come up with a cover story? It just, like I said, it's Occam's razor. It doesn't make any sense. The WBC just kind of sullies themselves by doing this, and the sport rolls forward. But I think, I think Gareth Davis pointed out, or Davies pointed out, that he's heard that Ben and Pacquiao, I think Eddie Hearns mentioned this, that we want the big fights, that might be a possibility. And there's money in Saudi Arabia. They would buy that fight. They want to see Pacquiao. So I think Pacquiao would do it if there's VADA testing, and away we go. The sport will roll forward. It's going to be incumbent on people to not let it. Humans are like designed to have short memories for survival, but like reporters are supposed to remember and not forget, and not just be part of the machinery of, oh, there's more fights next week, so I've just got to think about that now. I wrote 75 pieces on PEDs, and that was, what annoyed people was that I didn't forget, and when I saw you again, I brought it up again. Or I emailed you and called you, and it was annoying. But like, that's the job. It's not to be like, oh, Eddie, how you doing? How am I looking right now? Remember that last time we had tea together? And that's just embarrassing.
And this is the problem with that. Boxing media as a whole. In the UK, we have two pretty much full-time boxing journalists, which are Gareth A. Davis and Steve Bunce. About the only two that are outside of maybe Matt Christie at the Boxing News.
Oh yeah, Matt does great work.
Matt does, yeah. But then you have the YouTubers that turn up at press conferences and get given access to fights. It's not in their interest to sit and grill the people that can give answers about it, because frankly, they just won't get the access that they've maybe had before. Rob Tebbett of ID Boxing doesn't get the same access he used to get, and he's the only one out of all of them that has asked relevant questions over the years. Instead, it's far easier to allow, the friendly ones to not ask the follow-up questions, not listen to the answer, pick the answer apart and ask the follow-up questions, just allow you to spout the message that you'd pre-prepared.
And you don't have to be rude. Sometimes I was. I think, I think Danny is wily. He gets you talking, and so you.
Danny's very good.
Yeah, he's a good interviewer. I like Radio Raheem, but it's not his style to attack. But he will kind of go at points. But to me, it's the print guys that it's kind of missing. But also, yeah, I mean, I don't want to like name check everybody, but yeah, it's just frustrating because I feel like Eddie's there to be countered constantly, and it's
it's the right analogy as well. It's the absolute right analogy.
I'm like yelling at my TV, like just throw the right. But it is what it is. It's why I got into the business in the first place.
It doesn't change. The sport is frustrating. The whole Conor Benn thing, I'd say you have to almost turn a blind eye to it and say, okay, like it's not the first. It certainly won't be the last. And that's the sport. It's messy. I'm trying to pick my words very carefully.
There's nothing new under the sun, and it even the drug, like people think we're in the steroid era. It's like, no, that began after, perhaps. I mean, it began in the beginning of time, but it begins at least in boxing post World War II when guys bring meth back from the war. And if you thought only baseball players were doing greenies to go longer, in the 40s and the 50s, come on now, you're fooling yourself. I mean, look at them. They're doing 15-round fights and they're throwing like all the way through it. It's as old as time, and even like just thinking, I know we're running out of time, but like the Jake Paul fight, people are like, oh, no one's ever kind of done what he's done before. And I'm just thinking of like John L. Sullivan's first fight, how he becomes a fighter. So he shows up to like an opera house, and they've got like a boxer there who's like, anybody that can go 3 rounds with me, wins $100 or whatever. He gets on stage, they're kind of doing the rules, and the guy sucker punches him. John L. Sullivan turns around and knocks him into the orchestra pit. And a legend begins. There's nothing new in this sport. It's dirty as it was the first time 2 guys went, hey, I'll pay, I bet you that guy could beat that guy, and they put some money down on it. But hopefully you can do a little bit something. I mean, we are in the 21st century, and the Queensberry rules was a big step forward for boxing. So why can't we have better drug testing and some pensions and shit?
Let's keep fighting the good fight, Gabe. Mate, I appreciate your time so much.
Hey, always great to talk with you, man. Anytime.
Excellent. I appreciate it massively. Thank you very much, Gabe, for PitchBoxing. Much appreciated.